Hi all! Last week I took a class in which the class moderator compared figuring out the PPP to trying to make your way through a super complicated maze while playing dodgeball. And we all laughed, but that's a pretty accurate analogy. The bottom line is that most people who took this PPP are not going to be able to make their way through this maze without getting hit by one of the 9 dodgeballs out there flying around. So the purpose of this video is to provide you the information that you need to plan and adjust, keeping in mind that the SBA has up to 6 years from the date that the PPP loan is paid off to audit you. So make sure you are keeping all of the information within easy reach at any point in time. And for some of you, that means up to 11 years. All right, so I'm going to split this into 2 sections. Section 1 are the items that will simply reduce the forgiveness of the loan, and Section 2 are the items that could completely undermine the loan, as well as maybe get you into a little bit of trouble. Now, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, and I'm not going to go into super high detail as I've done that for these items in previous videos. So if you have any questions about it, take a look at some of my previous videos or give me a call or reach out to me, and I might be able to answer your question. So starting with Section 1, which are the items that can reduce forgiveness of the loan, the first one I want to talk about is the one I'm actually the least worried about. And that is making sure that you spent these funds on things that you paid or incurred within the covered period. Now, the covered period initially was February 15th through June 30th, which was a pretty narrow period of time. However, the new legislation extended this clear out to December 31st of this year. And it also increased the amount of time we have to spend the funds from 8 weeks from when we received the money to 24 weeks from when we received the money. So you can see why this isn't a huge worry. However, the next thing I want to talk about is a little bit of a concern for me because I think there's a lot of confusion surrounding it. There were expenses on which you were allowed to spend the money, but were not going to be forgivable. And a perfect example of this is your mortgage payment. You could make your mortgage payment with this money, but only the interest on that payment is going to be forgivable. The principal itself will have to be paid back. The third thing is salaries and wages and making sure that those amounts don't drop by more than 25% from pre-pandemic levels. That means if your wages and salaries dropped by 30%, 5% of your loan will not be forgivable. And that's the same thing with the FTEs, which is essentially your head count. So if your head count dropped by 10%, then your loan will not be forgiven in the amount of 10%. And then the last thing that will affect the forgivability of your loan is the grant. A lot of you received a grant, and that is going to reduce the amount that can be forgiven. So if you received a $5,000 grant, you can expect to be paying back $5,000 of your PPP loan at the very least. So that covers Section 1. Now, Section 2 are the items that could completely undermine the forgiveness of the PPP, as well as get you into a little bit of trouble. And the first one is spending the money on expenses that it was not intended to pay. Examples include inventory or supplies, and in some cases, people were calling me and telling me they were going to refinance their credit card debt with this low interest loan. And not only is that completely unacceptable and you'll have to pay it back, but you could get yourself into some trouble in doing so as well. So I recommend that if you did any of those things, that you pay it back and maybe even consult with a lawyer. The next thing is just taking the PPP when you didn't need it. Now, at the beginning of this, there was a mad dash for the money, and unfortunately, there were a lot of people who didn't necessarily need the PPP, but wanted it because they felt it was free money. When you get audited, the SBA will look at your cash flow at the time and determine whether or not you had resources outside of the PPP that might have gotten you through. So you're going to have to do a lot of proving. Not only are you going to have to prove the expenses that you spent that money on, but you're also going to have to prove that things were so uncertain during that period of time for you that you needed the PPP. And if that's something like, if you feel like maybe you took it and you didn't really need it, pay it back and contact a lawyer, because that's going to become an issue later on down the road if you are audited. Now, the other thing is disproportionate spending. So the new legislation says you have to use at least 60% of this loan on qualified payroll expenses, and you can spend no more than 40% of it on qualified non-payroll related expenses. But as I explained in my last video, the rub here is that if you don't spend at least 60% of it on payroll, then none of it is going to be forgivable, which means you will be paying 100% of it back. So don't get 59%. Make sure you have spent at least 60% of this on the loan. Now, I don't think it can get you into trouble unless they find something fraudulent about it, but you don't want to pay 100% of that loan back. And then the final thing I want to talk about is failure to prove what you spent the money on, or just flat out refusal. Now, failure to prove, maybe you're going to be found negligent and you may have to pay the loan back. But if you refuse to prove any of it, criminal or civil charges could be brought against you. So you really need to be careful and evaluate what it is that you're doing. I can't imagine anyone refusing to prove it. I do see that people could fail to prove what they spent that money on if they don't document. So from the beginning of this, I've said document, document, document. So that concludes my spiel for today. Please follow me on YouTube or Facebook, where I make sure to post these every Wednesday. Also, my next video is going to be about calculating the forgiveness, because guess what? That's not on the banks and it's not on the government. That is on us, and it's actually pretty difficult. As a matter of fact, it's been compared to trying to pin Jell-O to a wall. It's so difficult. So it may not be a short video, but I'd love to see you there. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.